This is a really exciting location here in Dubai. This tower is called the Index Tower, and right now I'm standing somewhere around the 70th floor. Now the 70th floor may seem high to you guys, but I'm staring at the Burj Khalifa, which is somewhere around 140 floors. So even at this height, we still have many towers that are above our altitude for shooting. In Dubai, you're going to find many beautiful vantage points, but many of them happen to be in private towers. Index Tower, in particular, is a private tower, and we have special permission to be here. But a good idea if you want to find great vantage points around the city is to look on Airbnb. So previously in this tutorial, I've been talking about using Booking.com. Now, Booking.com is great, but Airbnb allows you to stay in people's actual apartments. So all around Dubai, you may find unique access points that are otherwise unavailable to the public. I've been shooting Dubai since 2009, and throughout the years I've made a lot of friends who have unique access to different vantage points. So this is a really special situation for me because I can show you guys one of my favorite views of Dubai and the Burj Khalifa. Now it's very interesting with Dubai, we have the tallest building in the world, so that naturally becomes the main focal point for all the shots around downtown. So when you're finding a location to shoot in Dubai, you really have to do your research to see if you actually have the Burj Khalifa in view or it's a partial view. If you're on Airbnb.com and the tower and apartment building happens to have a unique view, believe me, they're going to be showing you that view on their page itself, because that is definitely an attraction for people to want to stay in that apartment. Throughout this tutorial section in Dubai, I'm going to be showing you guys both private areas and public areas. So don't worry if you can't get access to some of these private towers or you can't find anything on Airbnb. I'm going to show you locations that everybody can access as well. Another good rule of thumb is if you're staying in a hotel, ask them for a high floor apartment, the potential of a balcony view. If you ask for a city side view, often you can also get a really nice vantage point for photography. Another thing you can do, you can ask them if they might have a rooftop bar or terrace or even a lookout point. You'd be surprised how many unique vantage points you can find that way. This balcony on the Index Tower is a really great place for us to start our cityscape photography in Dubai because I'm basically constricted to a small location. On either side of me here on the balcony, on the left and the right, I actually have part of the structure itself that protrudes outwards, which means that I'm blocked on my view from the left or the right. So this camera is basically set up right about in the middle. I have it pushed right over the edge, and I'm shooting as wide as possible on this, which is 16 millimeter, and I basically just framed it right between the boundaries of my frame. So a little bit more to the left, and I'd have the wall in the frame, a little bit more to the right, and I'd have this wall in frame. So compositionally, this one's pretty straightforward. Oftentimes when you're in an apartment, you have just the balcony or potentially the roof. Now luckily, a lot of these places and a lot of the selling points of these apartments is their beautiful view of downtown. And in the case here, I have a beautiful unobstructed view of the Burj Khalifa and many of the beautiful buildings and streets in the downtown area. So while I can't move too much to the left or the right, I do have the potential to angle a little bit up and down. When I'm shooting at 16 millimeter, however, if I angle too much down, I'm going to get distortion on the buildings. So in this case, I really want to think about what I'm shooting. In cityscape photography in general, usually we're not shooting towards the tallest building in the world. So I want to be very careful because if I angle too far down, the Burj Khalifa is going to be totally out of frame. And just like anything else, when we have distortion, if we angle down more than 20 or 25%, when we try to fix that distortion, it's going to stretch everything out. So in a composition like this, my advice is to go pretty close to a center horizon line, and it's not a bad idea to actually center your horizon line with this type of cityscape photography because you're not actually having to use the 60-40 rule for composition like you would in a landscape or an old town like we were doing in Italy, because a lot of the buildings actually go above that horizon line. So giving yourself a nice level horizon line still gives you a nice composition, and it doesn't distort any of the buildings themselves. If you want to move the composition down a little bit and you find yourself with a little bit of distortion, that's going to be very easy to correct in post-processing. Sunset's going to happen in about 30 minutes. There's some beautiful clouds. I'm starting to get the nice soft light as that sun is going behind, in this case, both the cloud and the dust line on the horizon. As it starts to get darker, this is going to be really interesting because I'm looking for something very specific, and that's the colors of the streets. So right now, if we look at this view, if you take a look at the time lapse that we've captured, you can see that we have a lot of commerce happening on the streets. There's a lot of people walking and a lot of cars going by. Well, these crisscrossing streets right now look interesting compositionally, but as it starts to get dark, they're going to light up and become much more intense. So with the blue hour, it becomes very interesting. The buildings themselves have a lot of character and personality and different color lights. The sky itself turns a beautiful blue, and we might have a little bit of pink and purple in the sky itself. But the streets actually light up and turn a very vibrant yellow, which is a great complementary color against the blue itself. So when you're shooting before sunset and waiting for the blue hour, it's important to visualize not only the way that the buildings look here, but also the way that the streets look. And keep in mind that every street that passes in between those buildings will light up with the street lights and cause intense compositional leading lines into the frame. So it's important to bear that in mind when you're visualizing and setting up your frame. Account for any streets that are going to be leading the eye in the foreground, and if you have to angle the camera down to incorporate those streets, do it then at the sunset. So unlike the cities we've worked in previously on this tutorial, this is a different example where we really have to account for the way that the streets lead the eye in and how they're going to change during the blue hour. Something that's really interesting about Dubai, and we're going to see this when we start to shoot from different locations, every viewpoint, every balcony, every rooftop, basically every vantage point has its unique areas that you need to set up. So this one's actually pretty straightforward. This wall's a little bit high, so you can see that I'm using the center column. It's raised up obviously so that I have clearance, so this isn't in my frame. But something I've actually done is I've articulated the front two legs of the tripod out a little bit, and I've put them on this bar and extended this leg all the way out. The reason being is if I would have set the tripod up in a regular fashion, I wouldn't have been able to clear this at a wide angle. So you might also notice that my tripod isn't exactly level. It's shot off a little bit forward. This is fine at a certain degree, but if I were to level this a little bit more offset forward, it might be a little bit off balance. But this way, I'm able to use the center column, lean the camera forward. That way, when I'm tilting down at 16 millimeter, I'm able to clear this bar. One thing I did make sure of before I set the tripod up here was that this bar here, this metal bar, has no vibration. Oftentimes when you have metal surfaces on the top of buildings or on balconies, these railings are either unstable or you're going to find some sort of vibration. Now right now during sunset, my shutter speeds are relatively fast, so a little bit of vibration here isn't going to make that much of a difference, but imagine when we start getting into the night photography, we're shooting 15, 20, or even 30-second exposures, any vibration is going to cause softness in the resulting frame. So your creativity with how you set up the tripod is often limited to the space that you have to work with and the stability of the structure that you can actually set it up on. So I've talked a little bit about the camera setup. I've explained this fairly unique tripod setup that's off angle a little bit. I'm shooting at 16 millimeter. I have it pretty much framed on the horizon. I've tilted it down just a hair so I can get a little bit more of the road on the far lower right side, and I've stopped the composition just before I reach the wall edge of this building. And what I've done is I've set this camera up while we're talking. It's shooting every minute 3 exposure brackets in aperture priority mode at f8. Focus to infinite since we have an infinite focal plane in the background. And what I'm hoping happens here as the sun starts to set, I have a feeling that these rare clouds in Dubai may cast a little bit of color. So when I wanted to teach this initially, I thought it was just going to be a beautiful blue hour shot. But my hope now is that we're going to have a beautiful stage at sunset to blend with the blue hour lights in the bottom of the frame as well. So the goal right now, I have this camera clicking away every minute. I'm going to wait for the light to change. The sun's going to go down a little bit and we're going to see if we get any color in the sky. At that point, we're going to start transitioning into the blue hour, and I'll check back with you guys again as the light starts to change. I have to say that sunset exceeded my expectations. The sky lit up beautifully, and now we're approaching the end of a beautiful blue hour as well. Just like I thought, we're going to have some really nice frames of the peak of sunset, beautiful colors in the sky. We're going to be able to blend that with different stages of blue hour. Now, right now, I'm not really sure if I'm going to use a later blue hour for the bottom of the image when the lights are on, or I'm going to use an early blue hour. I'm really going to have to look at these images large on the screen before I determine that. One thing that did happen that I did anticipate was the lights from the roads themselves. Take a look at this frame that I captured about 15 minutes ago. Before, when we were looking at that time lapse together, you guys remember that we really couldn't see any of the veins of the streets causing color in the composition. But now on this frame, you can see that taking effect. So I have a couple leading lines on the bottom moving into the frame, and then I have the big angled road on the bottom, not to mention a lot of little roads in the background. Right around the mid frame on the right, there's also what we call the Ring of Dubai, that clear, clean lighting on the side there, so that's also beautiful. Now all of these lights, you don't see them until the blue hour comes on, but you have to anticipate that everything there is either pedestrian walkway or a road that cars drive on, so you have all this potential for not only leading lines that light up, but different colors for those lights as well. So this shot is turning out to be beautiful. We have perfect conditions here in Dubai in the wintertime, clear atmosphere, and very fortunate clouds. So I think we're going to be able to blend this together and create a really beautiful final shot. What's really interesting too is it's not just the foreground roads and elements of light that make this interesting. If you look in the background, there's so much going on. There's highways, there's streets, there's walkways, there's all of this intricacy going on in the frame. Every 15 minutes, the fountain show's coming on, and they also have a light show on the Burj Khalifa itself. So once it gets dark, you actually have a light show that keeps repeating itself where patterns go up and down the Burj Khalifa. So from a traveling standpoint, it's a really cool city just to check out the fountains, to check out the light show on the Burj Khalifa. And for a photographer, it's definitely a visual treat as well, because once the sun goes down and the lights come on, it's magic for photography. An interesting thing to point out here is there is a lot of traffic on the roads themselves, but since they are so well lit by street lights, you can try to capture car trails, but they don't really register as a strong, dominant subject. So what I like to do in this case is just show the streets as is, and not worrying too much about the faint imprint that the car trails would have as well. As we approach the end of the blue hour, just before it's fully dark outside, some things that I thought were going to light up actually didn't light up. These really short buildings compared to the tall skyscrapers in the background, there's not a whole lot of light down there. I like the veins of the road. Off here to the left as well, there's a few dark spots. And even towards the mall, the roof of the mall itself is lit up green. I really like that. But around the roof itself, it still seems a little bit dark. So on the right side, all the towers look good, but there's still some what I feel to be dead spots. So I'm curious now when I get into post-processing, how much of that I'm going to have to bring out, or if I'm going to have to replace it with an early blue hour frame. The reason being, during the early blue hour, I still had enough ambient light from the sky to fill in those voids of dark. The thing is, as it's later like this, towards the late blue hour, I also get the dominance of the lights in the street. So it's going to be really interesting to take this into post and see which frames work the best. As far as this location and scene goes, we got really lucky with an awesome sky, good clouds, clear atmosphere, and a beautiful blue hour. Composition is awesome. Can't wait to take this into post-processing. But as far as shooting for tonight, I have about 5 more minutes until it's full dark outside. Now, throughout this tutorial, you've heard me refer to this as the blue hour. In Dubai, it's often a blue 5 or 10 minutes, so that window is really small, and I think I've captured it. So the next time I see you guys, we're going to take all of these frames into post-processing, and we're going to see the difference between the early blue hour, the late blue hour. We're going to find the perfect balance of light in the city, and we're going to try to use some of the best elements of the sky. Welcome back to the post-processing studio, everybody. Now we're going to start working on the images we were able to capture in Dubai. And the first one I want to talk about is the beautiful view from the Index Tower. Now, something to point out, the Index Tower is a private residence, though sometimes I have seen those apartments go up on Airbnb. So if you're going to Dubai and you happen to catch one of those on Airbnb and you know it's a city-facing view, might be worth picking it up because these are balcony shots and they are very, very extraordinary. So for this one, it's a single shot. If you remember when we were on location, we were kind of confined to the balcony itself. The building kind of stuck out past the balcony, which only allowed us to shoot within that little container. But even then, we were still able to get a lot of the city and these beautiful streets. So let's go ahead and open up Lightroom and get started. For this scene, I want to have a little bit of fun with blending. So I've actually brought in a couple different stages. This is going to be the base. This is a natural exposure, medium to late blue hour. And you can see I have an underexposure because we're going to have to take care of those highlights. What I've done is I brought in a very late blue hour, and you can see how it chisels out all of the lights in the street. So we're going to combine that in as well. We're also going to do a little bit with this early exposure when the sun was still way up in the sky, so way before sunset, and I'll bring that back in just a moment. But the first thing I want to point out here, if you look at the side here, here's that part of the building that I was talking about. So the first thing we're going to have to do is address the distortion. So let me just go ahead and pull the exposure up just so we can see the edges of the building. We'll change that back in just a minute, and I'm going to scroll down. So we'll go ahead and select the upright transform, and we're going to look for two edges, one on the left and one on the right. The nice thing about Dubai is all of these towers are actually straight. It's not like Italy where you have to worry a little bit about whether or not they're actually straight. These are indeed straight. So let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit, make it easier to see, and we'll pan over. Actually, that's a little too far. Let's zoom out. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on the edge of this building here, draw one of the lines. Perfect. We'll go to this little building right here and draw another one, and that should pop right in. Now that I have those drawn, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit further. I'm going to make sure that they're just right, perfectly aligned. And you can see because I was zoomed out, that wasn't quite right. So we have to find those perfect edges. There's one of them. Scroll back over here to the left, and once again, just sort of tweak these a little bit until they're perfect. And that looks pretty good. Let's zoom that out and take a look at the scene. And I'll go ahead and toggle this off so we can see it without that. And if I roll over any of the transforms, I can actually see the grid overlay. And if I look at the grid overlay, this area looks perfect. The one on the right looks perfect. And I shot it a little wide when I was in the field because I knew this was going to happen. I knew it was going to pull the bottom of the scene out and thereby get rid of the side of the building. So I'm going to scroll up here. I'm going to set this little setting here, the noise reduction, back to 20, and I'm going to go back up to here, and I'm going to reset the exposure like I never had it turned up. And with this selected, I'm going to go ahead and select everything around it, right-click, develop settings, sync settings. And no tone, noise reduction, definitely, and we have lens corrections. Those are the two things, and we'll synchronize all. First thing, let's start with our base exposure. Base exposure is going to be this blue hour shot. The first thing is it's a little dark, so let's go ahead and pull the shadows up just a little bit, and also pull the blacks up just a little bit. That looks a little bit better. We're starting to see these little details down here. But now let me go ahead and adjust for the sky. It's a little blown out. So we'll just use a simple gradient with a sharp fall off from the sky. Something like that. I'll go ahead and reset everything here. First thing I want to do, let's go ahead and bring the exposure down just a little bit. We're going to bring it down to a quarter stop. So remove just a quarter stop. We'll also take the highlights down about a half a stop. And you know what, before we go any further, let's bring the dehaze a little bit just to get a little bit more detail. And to compensate for what that's done, let's go ahead and pull the shadows up just a little bit as well. So we'll actually go up to 50. And we'll set the dehaze to something like 25. Nice. So we have a nice dramatic result, and we're able to pull down those highlights in the sky, maybe even a little bit more. With this being our base exposure, let's go ahead and export it. And I'll just check my export settings just to make sure everything's okay. PSD ProPhoto 16, open in Photoshop, export. All right, let's head back to Lightroom. And let's go ahead and make the adjustment for these highlights. The highlights that I'm really worried about are these here in the mall and also these here in this construction site area. You can see that those are really, really hot. So I know that even if I pull the highlights way down in this scene, I'm still going to need that underexposure to be able to pick it up quickly. So let's go ahead and make the adjustments to our underexposure. And I'm just going to do the normal 50-50 thing that I do here. So we're going to go ahead and bring the highlights down, the shadows up to about 50. We're going to bring the whites down and the blacks up, just around 50. So we end up with a really neutral result, but if we zoom in, you can see that we actually get the detail, the Dubai Mall, Emaar Towers, and all of those little details, even in this construction site, all that stuff that I wanted to maintain. Let's go ahead and zoom that back out. Export this one with previous. Now I'm going to select all, copy, Command-C, I'm going to close with Command-W, and I'm going to paste this one right on top. So we're going to call this Adjusted Blue Hour. And we'll call this Blue Hour Highlights. So what we're going to do is go into channels and we're just going to create our luminosity masks. We're going to create the first one, name it High 1, Highlights 1, and we're going to make sure that that's selected, and we're going to intersect the selection and create a new one called High 2. And you guys should be pretty used to this by now. We're going to load this as a selection. I'm going to create a new folder, apply the mask, and throw that inside of that folder. So you can see that right now, by itself, it's a little bit dull. And something else to point out too, you can see that these are shot back to back, but you can see how fast that sky is actually moving. So this is a really good example of why we do this selectively and not as like a blended HDR or using a panel that actually blends all three of these exposures together. Because even between the three exposures, regular, over, and under, look how much movement we have. So there's no movement in the city, thankfully, because that would mean earthquake, but there is movement in the sky. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is black out a mask here on the highlights, and we'll go ahead and paint them in selectively. So with a flow of about 20%, I can go ahead and paint in the highlights that I'm trying to correct. Now obviously I love the way that these lights look in the background. A lot of this looks really good, but this looks really blown out. Now again, it's sort of up to you which ones you want to bring in. I recommend trying to maintain as many as possible, but really this is just about grabbing the ones that look really bad. And some of them are always going to be a little bit blown out, but if you can fix a few of them, especially the really noticeable ones, it goes a long way. So let me just go ahead and keep cleaning these up. That's a pretty obnoxious light right there. I should get rid of that. Maybe some of these down here. And anything that just looks out of place. These. Now obviously the Burj is a little dark. They put all this money into creating this amazing tallest building in the world, but they didn't think too much about lighting, which is kind of disappointing. But I guess it does cost a lot to light the tallest building in the world as well. All right, so we'll just toggle this on and off, and that took care of the ultra highlight. So let's go ahead and go back into Lightroom. One of the reasons I picked this one as the base blue hour wasn't just the lights in the city, but it was also the color in the sky. Still have some nice pink, some yellow, and some clouds on the top. You can see as the blue hour gets too late, what you'll notice is that the clouds end up becoming illuminated by the city itself. So here looks pretty good. We still have a lot of light on the right, which is washing out some of the city, and we have the start of the lights. But by the time the lights are fully on and vibrant, the sky is finished. So what I want to do is use the lights from this late blue hour and combine them with our base exposure. And to do that, I just need to make a few small adjustments. Let's actually bring the highlights down just a little bit. And the whites down as well. Just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and export this with previous as well. Once again, let's move this on top here in our composition. Zoom out, I'll call this late blue hour. And we'll call this highlight adjustment. Perfect. So we have the early and late blue hour. Let's set this to lighten and see how it looks. All right, toggle this on and off. And first of all, the bottom of the frame looks pretty good. I really like the way that the lights on the road look. It's really helping to bring those out. And I kind of like these extra lights, these extra reflections here. Now, we're also getting later lighting in this area. So I'll toggle this on and off one more time. You can see more lights have actually turned on in the city. The other thing is, if we look at the Burj itself, and I'll zoom in a little bit here, you can see that there's more light on the Burj Khalifa. Well, now let's talk about the negative things that are happening. One, obviously, is, well, the clouds. There is some collateral damage that we're going to need to take care of. A few other things that I toggle on and off that I don't like. I don't like these hot lights here. And over here you can see this is the crane. The crane actually moves over time because they build all night sometimes in Dubai, so we're going to have to adjust that. If I roll over to the left side here, there are probably more cranes. You can see that another crane kind of pops in, and there are some harsh highlights. So the first thing that I want to do is move the late blue hour between the adjusted blue hour and the highlight adjustment. So those highlights will stay on top no matter what I do, and will maintain that correction. Next thing I want to do is just go ahead and create a mask, grab the paintbrush again, and paint black over the areas that I don't want. Now I'm using a 20% flow. I can go up to 40 or 50 because I'm pretty sure whatever I'm going to paint here is going to be gone for good. So the Burj Khalifa looks much better now. Let's go ahead and get rid of these bad areas here in the clouds. These areas here, the super highlights that I don't want. And you know what? I'm actually also just going to paint a little bit of this out in certain areas. And we'll toggle it on and off here, on and off here, these extra lights here. We'll zoom it out, take a look at the bottom, see if there's anything else happening here. That looks pretty good. The really nice thing, as a side effect, we get the extra lights in the road, but we also get more reflections on the buildings themselves. So I have to decide if I want to keep these reflections here or I want to keep the dark shape of the buildings. Now, in this case, I think I'm going to do half and half. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that away. And the reason is I feel there's a lot of yellow in this area, and I want these towers here to kind of feel isolated. And in order for them to feel isolated, they shouldn't be as yellow as the surrounding colors. Same thing around here. I probably just want to pull a little bit of that away from the background just to chisel out these towers here. Pretty cool. So far, that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and back that up and take a look at the whole image. And I'll just go with our adjusted here on and off, and you can see we've been able to get the highlights back. And what I'm looking for is no artifacts in the sky, no extra things in the clouds that I've forgotten about, no mystery cranes or anything else getting in the way. All right, so that's starting to look pretty good. It's a nice blue hour blend. Let's go back into Lightroom and do something a little bit different. Let's bring in something we wouldn't normally bring in. Let's go right to the daytime shot. So notice something about the daytime shot. Well, one, it's daytime, that's the obvious thing, but we have a lot of light coming in from the right side and illuminating the sides of these towers. If we go back into Photoshop and we take a look, there is no natural light illumination, just a little bit from the sky that's casting some color. So we're not getting the strong blue on the buildings, we're also getting a little bit of pink and a little bit of yellow on the buildings themselves. But we're not getting that strong lighting from the side. So what we can do is we can actually use this to our advantage. We can take this and actually take advantage of some of the color and the illumination, mainly in these areas and the side of these towers, and see if that helps our blend and gives us a unique result. So straight out of camera here, aside from the distortion, I'm going to leave everything here alone. We're going to leave that default. I'm going to export this with previous. Let's select all, we'll copy, and we'll put this on top of everything. And we'll call this daytime. Now, drastic difference, obviously drastic difference. Let's go ahead and set this also to the light and blending mode and see what happens. All right, sky, not so great, but pay attention to what's going on in the city. So now you can see here on the right side of these buildings, I'm starting to get illumination. So see that illumination sitting right on top? See the illumination on the side of the metro, and see also the illumination from the sun here. Well, that's pretty interesting. Now, we have some bad things happening here. Sun shadows. Should not get any shadows, so that's going to have to go. But we are getting some detail on these buildings. And I really like the buildings right here. If I turn this off and turn this on, a couple things are happening. These are changing color, which means they're becoming a little bit more separated from the background. So this is sort of a natural color separation that we're using with blending. Here, here, and especially right here if I turn that on and off. But obviously we can't use that everywhere. So let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. First thing is, let's go ahead and create a mask and select the gradient tool. We'll go from white to black. Obviously we want it from here to about here. And we don't need anything in the sky. So we'll take a look at that. We're still getting a lot of those effects on the buildings, and we're getting a strong effect here. So we'll switch to the brush. Painting black, we'll just go ahead and paint out the areas that we don't want. So I don't want any of that in the middle here, none of it here, and none of it down here. And I actually kind of like it on the side of the buildings here. Let's go ahead and remove a little bit of it here and just a tiny bit from the side, because I feel like that helps give a little bit more dimensionality to that building. And we'll go ahead and take a look. It actually looks pretty interesting. Perfect. Good. So the other thing is, some of this we have to decide. Now this is really interesting. These buildings here looked very flat before, and you can see them before. Those shades of blue are pretty much shades of gray. But when I add this layer, you can see that it chisels it right back out. And it's also pretty interesting here. You get a few cars that weren't there before. But the metro itself, the metro station, looks pretty cool. I actually like it. So we'll do some last cleanups, and we'll take a look. One more before and after, and we'll settle on it. And we'll call this blended result. All right, now everything's blended together. Let's use Shift, Option, Command, E, create a new layer, and we're gonna go into Adobe Camera Raw Filter, ACRF, Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Now it's time to add some contrast. Sometimes with all the blending, we tend to take a lot of the contrast out because we're pulling up the shadows and pulling down the highlights. What I'm going to do globally here is first add regular contrast. Let's add a little bit of dehaze. And you can see actually if I just slide this, notice the haze on the background. In this case, dehaze is actually cutting down on the haze. One thing in Dubai, no matter how clear it is, there is always going to be haze or dust on the horizon. So that combination of dehaze and contrast is going to kind of pull everything back together. The next thing I want to do is adjust just the sky. So let's go ahead and draw another gradient, just adjusting the sky itself. And I'll make that sort of a tight selection. Let's go up here and reset local correction settings. Now let's add a little bit more contrast just to the sky. And let's add a little bit more dehaze just to the sky itself. And you know what? Just because we have the sky selected, I want to go ahead and pull some of the detail of these clouds out. So I'm going to add just a tiny little bit of clarity. You guys know that I only use clarity sparingly when I need to pull extra details out of things like that. And the sky here is definitely an example where I want more clouds in Dubai. Dubai is one of those places where clouds are special, so anything we can do to enhance them definitely goes a long way. And I'm just going to actually add maybe, let's say 15 on that, just to be a little bit more dramatic. And with everything set there, the next thing I want to be able to do is maybe change the color, the brightness of these yellows, but I'm going to do that in a different step, and here's why. If I actually go into the luminance and we change the oranges here, I'm actually going to be manipulating the sky. So while those lights down there look pretty nice, you can see how the sky doesn't look great as well. Now I could try to do that with a selection here, but the problem is if we go back to the selections, we have a lot of options. We can change some things, but we don't have the complete tool set. We actually don't have the H, SL, and grayscale options. So I'm going to go ahead and apply what we've done so far, these global corrections, and we'll come back in another pass and we'll take care of these other lights. All right, so there's the drama. The drama's back. It's a little bit more contrast and we have more things going on in the sky itself. So now let's go ahead and duplicate this again. Go back up to filter and back up to the camera filter. Let's go right here, and what I'm going to do is in the luminance channel I'm going to change these oranges. So we're just going to go ahead and bring that up to about 35%. That looks pretty good. And maybe we can also knock out some of the color cast here in the blue. Let's see. We can darken some of the blues down there just a little bit. You can see I'm looking at these highlights here. If I pull the blues down, way down, you can see it darkens those. But it's also creating a little bit more contrast in these highlights. I'm just going to pull that down just a little bit, and I'll say OK. So now you can see that I have tweaked the sky here. That's not what I want. Let's go ahead and create a mask. And with the gradient tool selected, from white to black, we'll have it fade from here to here. So we'll call this ACRF color foreground. Before I move on to the next step, I just want to take a look at everything as a whole. So this was an aggressive contrast adjustment, and then this was a color adjustment for the foreground. But I feel that I've darkened these clouds a little bit too much. So what I can always do, and the nice thing about this Camera Raw filter, I can always go back into the filter, and I can always add a little bit more. So let's say we want to correct some of that here just in the sky. Well, I can reset what I had before, and in this case, I can actually just pull the shadows up. Now, I'm pulling the shadows up not just for the clouds themselves, but also for the Burj Khalifa. So that's something that I want to be able to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and make small adjustments and say OK. And you can see if I just toggle that back and forth, you can see that I've kind of adjusted for that overcorrection that I made before. Now the next thing I want to point out is these clouds up here. Now notice I have this nice orange, sort of yellow and pink color. Well, what if I wanted to extend some of that color into the sky? Now I obviously want to maintain the blue of the blue hour like we always do, but I want to create a selection just for these white portions of the cloud and then apply a color adjustment just to that selection. So let's go ahead and look at the channels. If I audition the channels one by one, blue, you can see that sky's mostly selected. Green, actually that's looking pretty good. But if I go to red, you can see that red really shows all of the clouds and some dark areas around there. So let's go ahead and duplicate the red channel. So we'll just call this red selection. We'll load this here, go to the layers, create a folder, create a mask on that folder, and we'll call this reds. Now inside of here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create first one curves layer, and now this is going to be applied to the entire image. I'm going to go into the red, and we're just going to go ahead and lift that up. And you can see as I do that, I'm starting to get that pink color inside of those white areas of the mask. And if I show the mask, you can see that it's only going to be in these areas, just spilling over into the blue just a little bit. So let's just go ahead and over adjust that a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the reds. You can see that that's becoming a little bit pink. If we add a little bit blue, it tends to clean that color up a little bit, and it basically prevents too much spillover from this blue. We don't want red in the blue. If we add a little bit of blue, it actually mixes it pretty well. If I toggle that on and off, you can kind of see the result. Well, first things first, we don't want any of that in the foreground, so let's go ahead and in this curves right here, let's go ahead and use a gradient. And we want it to be from here to about there. Now that I have that selected, that's looking pretty good, but let me go ahead and make some small adjustments. Right now it's a little bit too strong. I want it to be subtle, so I'm going to bring that down just a little bit until we like the result. So a subtle result, a little bit more pink on the horizon in the sky. Now notice that while it has affected most of this side, it hasn't really done much here. Well, let's go ahead and create an additional curves layer. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one. Now right now, since I duplicated, it's going to be a double effect. But let's go ahead and really tweak this and see what happens. And let's pay attention to this part of the sky right here. As I start to tweak it, you can see that I am getting some color up here in the corner. So let's go ahead and do the same thing in the blues. A little bit more. And if I toggle that, you can see that I'm getting a little bit of color on this side of the screen. Well, that's exactly what I want. But it's a little bit too intense right now. I only want it to affect a little bit of this side of the image. So let me go ahead and modify this mask. So the first thing is I only want it to affect from here to about here. So that's just going to be the top part, and you can see the top part of the sky right there. But I also only want it to affect this side of the image fading off here to the right. So with this one selected already, I've created one gradient. With the gradient tool, I'm going to make sure this is set to multiply, and we'll go ahead and do this in the mask so we can take a look. I want this effect to happen from about here to here. And since multiply is selected, it's basically going to black out over top of what's underneath, and it's going to give me the ability to just select this area. And with that selected, I can make some further adjustments to the red, which is going to be right around here, and that blue. So it's going to give me the ability to just adjust that part of the image. If I toggle it on and off, you can see that it's a slight adjustment. I get some more pink in the sky, and it fades in to the other one that I already created over here. Well, all this looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this a little bit. You can see that there are a lot of highlights on the Burj Khalifa. So when I have adjusted the sky a little bit and made that pink, I've also made the Burj Khalifa pink, and we definitely don't want to do that. So let's just go ahead and quickly mask out the Burj Khalifa. I'd like to use the brush, but in this case, I'm going to use the lasso tool, and I'm just going to make a simple selection of the Burj. And since it's color, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just going to go ahead and grab right on the inside of this edge all the way up. So this is a really easy thing to select. It's very linear. It basically just staggers as we get to the top. So it's just really easy to create a selection. And we'll just continue this. I'm also grabbing right inside the edge. I don't want to grab the outside of the edge, just the inside. Here too, I can just go right up into a point, all the way down. This is actually how they got the highest floor rating. Believe it or not, up on that tower, those are actually considered to be floors of the Burj Khalifa. There's not a whole lot that can fit up there though. All right, so we'll go ahead and terminate the mask there, zoom it out a little bit, and I'm just going to make this visible while I do this. I'm going to turn this to black, just like that, and we'll deselect. And we'll take a look. So those reds should only be affecting outside of the Burj Khalifa and giving a little bit more life to the sky. Now, something I've noticed about this, it's a pretty cool image overall, but I've noticed that out of all of the clouds, I really like the way this looks. It's kind of wispy, there's some nice detail, but I feel like this area right here, this spot right in the middle is a little bit distracting. It just seems too dark than the rest of it. So I kind of just want soft sort of pink and blue there. So the issue is I can't really use a content aware tool. Let's go ahead and create a new layer for an example of this. If I were to try to just remove it, it doesn't do a really good job. It kind of created little puffy clouds, but you can see it's not really doing what I want it to do. In fact, I don't want that to disappear. I just want it to be a little bit softer in color. So I could move over to the clone brush, and I could try to say, well, you know what, let's grab some of this, and I could try to paint that in. But you can see even that, it's too light up top. So now it's not really looking right. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the paintbrush. And with the paintbrush selected, if you hold the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, you can actually sample different colors. So if I want to use this soft color here, I can sample that color and I can set the flow to something really low, like 2%. You guys can probably get away with 10%. I'm kind of heavy-handed when it comes to these things. But what we can do is just sample different colors, and you can see as I sample here, pay attention to the palette on the left side of the screen. You can see that that's going to select those custom colors. So everything underneath, I can go ahead and grab some of this nice color here, just like that, and I can just paint some of that color in and soften that out. Take some of the lighter color from here and paint just to soften that out. Grabbing a little bit more color, isolating it just a little bit more, and you can see now I can just get rid of that, making it soft. So that softens the whole thing out, and make sure you don't have to rely on grabbing the similar colors with the clone stamp or the content aware, because the content aware doesn't always fix that result. So we're going to call this Sky Patch. And I'll save this in the background when we move on to the next step. So what I want to do now is, with everything going on here, what we're going to do is go ahead and make a selection for the midtones so we can add some midtone contrast, sort of bump the midtones a little bit. So let's go ahead and select, we already have the highlights here. Let's just go ahead and select the highlights, Command-Shift-I, invert them, and we'll call this shadows. And I'll select all, and I'll subtract the shadows and the highs. We'll go to the layers, and I'll just create a curves layer and name it midtones. So now what I can do here is I can actually boost some of the darker colors and pull down some of the lighter colors here. So it gives me the ability to pick up some of that detail in the shadows. We can turn this on and off. Oh, it looks pretty good. Actually looks great in the foreground. That's exactly what I want. So let's go ahead and do a little bit more aggressively. Whoops. Sometimes those will disappear. In the foreground, that's looking nice, but I also don't want this to affect the sky. I like the sky the way it is, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is select this midtones here, and instead of doing this on another folder, we can take a look. What I'm actually going to do is that same trick, if you don't want to use a folder, with multiply, I'm going to say that it's going to be affected from about here to here. And you can see that that's going to darken that result. So if I look at the midtones again, you can see how that's working. I can actually select it from here to here and further darken that result for the midtone. So it gives you a way to just quickly make selections and adjustments to the image. Now that that's done, we have the midtones. Let's go ahead and address the sharpening. What I'll do is I'll duplicate this layer, move it to the top, filter, other, high pass. So I've been using 2.5 previously. I'm going to up that to 3 for this city. And we'll be really aggressive with 100% overlay, placing a mask on it, and just having it affect just this area of the foreground. So we'll call this high pass filter 3.0. Nice. Let's go ahead and zoom in and see what that's doing. So here we have without and with the high pass filter. So obviously the next step is to go in and soften up the sky with the same techniques we've been using, but I'm going to go ahead and save that for the next lesson. But before we wrap things up, let's go back to Lightroom. Let's bring this in. Let's go ahead and readjust the underexposed image here, and let's get this in so we can examine the result. So export with previous, use unique names, and we'll select all. And we'll bring this in to the bottom. We'll call this original. Oh, I should probably spell that right. Original underexposed blue hour. And this is all going to be named the exact same way for you guys when you open up the PSD. Now that this is in here, let's go ahead and take a look at everything that we've done. So if we were going to use a single exposure, it would have had to have been the underexposed image so we could maintain the highlights. The first thing we did is we adjusted the neutral exposure and then fixed the highlights. We also did something different. We brought in a daytime shot to pick up some of the details here that were lost in the blue hour. Next thing we did is we used a series of 2 camera raw filters to adjust the color and the contrast in the foreground and background. We patched the sky a little bit, and we added some contrast, some red color, and a high pass filter to chisel out the details in the foreground. So if we look at this all together, we started, here is straight out of camera just with the distortion corrected. So this is what we started with, this is the before, and this is the after. So once again, before and after. Now that is a huge difference from start to finish. Well, that wraps things up for the first lesson in Dubai. Next time I see you guys, we are going to be quite high up on a rooftop in a precarious shooting situation, trying to get seamless panoramic images. I'll see you guys there.